Hello and welcome to our podcast. Today you'll be joined by myself, LeSean, and I'll be answering one of our viewers' interesting question. The question that they've asked: in what ways is the global economy being reconfigured, and what does this mean for the balance of economic and political powers between states, markets, and multinational corporations? In this example, I've chosen one of the most talked about topics today, the AI industry, one of the most revolutionary technologies man has produced, and is currently leading to the biggest changes happening in our current global economy. In Peter Dickens' book, The Global Shift, he explains that our global economy is shaped primarily from interactions between nations, various states, and companies from across different various borders, not just by a free market. This concept is vital as AI started to force nations, governments, firms to start adapting, changing, and reconfiguring how current sourcing of production, trade, and regulations need to be changed and adapted to fit our current world market conditions. The first type of reconfiguration that is currently occurring is with global supply chains. How, you may ask? Well, AI depends and works fluently on something called semiconductors, which are utilized by Claude, OpenAI, DeepSeek, and many others. However, the chips used to create them are extremely limited and are currently facing shortages due to the intense AI boom and demand. Additionally, the top 5 countries and economies account for about 87% of global manufacturing capacity. The issue with this is because AI chips are high in the supply chain. A single disruption causes ripple effects to disperse for our industries, and they are the building blocks for modern tech, which could affect phone industries, the automotive industries, and many others. This creates an extreme chokehold, as these 5 economies can influence others. However, to prevent this, the government has shifted control from a free market and neoliberal way to a more state-controlled one, a government intervention one. How has the government intervened though? Well, through the following ways. Firstly, export control. Under the new Trump administration, they're preventing data chips from going directly to China. Next is subsidies. They're preventing offshoring. So companies work from home instead of going to other countries. Governments are splurging them with money on investment so they stay. Regulations to prevent collapse in the supply chains. We're saying if regulations are not in place, it leads to financial difficulties and crashes and collapses. All of these are to protect such valuable oil technology. We have similar examples of this, like the EU Chip Act. EU aims to join the AI race by increasing the chip production by 2030. They've invested 43 billion euros in policy-driven investments. A perfect exemplification of how governments are adapting new trade and investment, away from efficiency costs and towards more secure and resilient ways. The second major reconfiguration shifts AI from more of a commercial way they used to be, used by students, institutions, and businesses, to more strategic assets. It's used for critical areas such as cybersecurity, intelligence, and primarily military dominance. This type of securitization of technology is best illustrated by the US export controls on advanced AI chips and semiconductor equipment. It was updated by the Federal Register in October 2023. By restricting access to choke point technologies such as AI and semiconductors, the US has transformed trade policy into a strategic weapon, signaling a move away from more market-led globalism towards a techno-nationalism way. Thirdly, reconfiguration is a pragmatic shift away from neoliberalism, where it's primarily privatization of companies. Privatization of companies, where companies dominated and led market events to occur, towards more of a global state-controlled capitalism. It's now being controlled by governments. Historically, the rules of the global economy allowed multinational corporations to thrive. They used to thrive off tax havens, going to countries in areas like Ireland, Monaco, Dubai, where tax was limited. And this was a loophole that governments picked up on, and they grew increasingly frustrated. And in order to fix this and prevent this, over 140 countries came together in an agreement through the OECD and G20 Act and agreed to introduce a global minimum tax of 15%. The OECD claims this reform is designed to, quote, update international tax rules to fit the modern digital economy. This shift directly demonstrates how states and governments and nation states are starting to regain all their power, not just sitting from the sidelines and watching. Their power is starting to influence the way multinational corporations are starting to work, activate, and cooperate with the government, actively rewriting the rules of global capitalism. Furthermore, let's link this back to power. How does this affect power? Well, governments and states have increased power massively. As I mentioned before, they're not just watching anymore, they've intervened in the following ways. Firstly, it's restricting exports. This is a very aggressive form. When they restrict exports to areas like China, they prevent rivalry, they prevent competitiveness. They want to be ahead of the AI race. However, there are issues that come with this, implications. It limits growth for others due to the complications. There's no more sharing of knowledge with other countries. Subsidies, right? Subsidies. Governments are splurging, as I mentioned, investment, billions, even near trillions into these companies to stay in their countries and produce the AI and semiconductors there rather than going and outsourcing them. This risks supply chains. Taxation is another way. The 15% corporate tax. It's an incentive for companies to come back and stay rather than move to other countries. There's no point anymore. There's no tax havens. Multinational corporations do have power still. However, even with the takeover in the AI industry, hyperscalers like Microsoft, Google, OpenAI, they have the four pillars that no government or state can replicate directly. Firstly is data ecosystems. They have mass data with trillions of information. Cloud infrastructure platforms, research talent. They're taking one of the smartest people all over the world that can work for them. Governments cannot replicate this. And they have global value chains. Instead, governments need their expertise that these firms have. Why? Well, it's how they stay ahead of the game. It's how they stay competitive compared to other countries like China. Countries in the first place need them. On the other hand, multinational corporations get subsidies and security needed to stay ahead and grow continuously. This shows the future of governance. How will a joint partnership between states and one of the biggest corporate superpower firms work and function together? Markets still do matter. However, much less powerful than they used to be during the neoliberal peak, the golden age of globalization during the 1990s. Financial investment still continues, governments are still rewarding winners, and they're starting to decide who is entering the market and who's allowed to exist now, specifically through the controlled environment of data rules, chips, and any sort of AI or advanced technology that they utilize. Again, this is a pragmatic shift, closely links back to Dickens' concept that states are not merely passive recipients of outcomes of global economic processes, but are active participants in shaping them. Consequently, however, this has led to a rapid shift from market outcomes, market solutions and systems towards a more state-run, right? It's more regulated because of this. This is not as efficient now. There's much more regulation, more political rules, more security in place, and it's affecting the flow of global production networks, information and collaboration between different countries and nations worldwide. Let's get more critical now. What's the consequence of such reconfiguration? Well, firstly and foremost is inequality. There is geographical asymmetry of information. There is evidently a hierarchy from the most high-value AI activity, evidently concentrated in the global north areas like the US, China, EU, where we see the hyperscale firms allocate like NVIDIA, Google, MSI. They're dominating the AI industry. Throughout the 3 years, the North has received billions, if not trillions, in just AI investment. Because countries in the global south like Kenya, Philippines provide the ghost work essential of the data labeling, whilst areas like Dominican Republic, Peru, Chile do all the raw extraction of raw materials like lithium, cobalt. There's asymmetrical structured hierarchy. This essentially creates digital dependency, as there is an uneven distribution of profits and technology that are concentrated in core countries, the MEDCs, which widens the development gap and equality gap, unless periphery states start making a stance and tradition towards a more innovative infrastructure systems, rather than just being the producers alone. To conclude, there are negatives and positives that come with it. Firstly, the economic growth that comes with AI reconfiguration. According to JP Morgan, there's a 7% predicted GDP increase when adopting AI due to increase of education around them, resultantly leading to economic long-term growth and productivity for nations. Conversely, the IMF has argued that splitting into trade blocks would just be worse and reduce global output by 7% because of the current export controls and more trade barriers, which would minimize and wouldn't allow the diffusion of knowledge and collaboration between nations. To conclude, the AI industry has become a catalyst for reconfiguration of the global economy, moving it away from a market rule system and instead towards a government state-controlled one. This is the reflection part now. When constructing and making my podcast, this was quite challenging and there were quite a lot of valuable things that I learned from making this. My primary goal was to basically explain and evaluate how the AI industry is starting to reshape the global economy and basically starting to adapt a new way that the balance of power between states, market and multinational corporations is being done. I thought that the podcast format was a very foundational and strong type of way to discuss this topic. Due to it being so broad, I was able to be much more expressive by using more tones and expressions when discussing in my podcast. One of the biggest positives that came along with this podcast is the way I started to understand things much more quicker. The key concepts from the module like globalization, power systems, economic institutions and development. When I keep speaking them and repeating them, it made my understanding much more clearer compared to when I'm just writing it. But when I was speaking it numerous times, I fully grasped the concept even more. And it made me link new concepts to other concepts and I made connections. Additionally, I was able to think more critically. I was able to understand how the AI industry really works. For example, I never knew before that the AI industry expanded to the global south and more periphery areas, not just the core areas. I initially thought the AI conduction and all these semiconductors were produced in core rich areas until I came to realize that the primary data extraction, like lithium, cobalt, the raw materials are made in these low-income countries, but they're being overlooked. Additionally, I find it very interesting how the governments are starting to take more control. Instead of being more market-led, it's now being intervened by governments. And especially with the AI industry, we're starting to see a lot of this now, especially in today's world. Throughout the news, you start seeing USA rivaling with China and many other countries, and it makes you realize how much more regulation there really is being inputted, especially with the growing rise of AI. However, there were some negatives as well during this. Firstly, it was the time constraints. Fitting such a broad topic into an 8-minute time frame was extremely difficult, and it may have made my speaking unclear to the examiner. Another challenge was balancing academic quality with my natural speech, and it was incorporating the key features. There was so much information in such a broad topic that I missed out on a lot of key features, which I wish I had included, but there was just not enough time. I had to only pick out the main parts and most important parts. However, overall, I believe this podcast was the appropriate way of discussing this topic, and I believe now learning my mistakes and reflecting back on it, I can produce a perfect podcast in the future. Thank you for listening.